How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Moradiega. Today is July 22nd, a Monday to start the week with some more rounds of NFL discussions that I wanted to bring to you guys on today's show. We're going to start off with talking about the Dallas Cowboys reportedly now prioritizing CeeDee Lamb's contract negotiations over that of Dak Prescott. Then we're going to go over ESPN's top 10 defensive back rankings that came out last week. I didn't get a chance to comment on them, so I wanted to bring that to you guys here today. And also, Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers contract negotiations over the week. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler gave a report on where those negotiations are heading. I'll react to that and just give my thoughts on how it affects Jordan Love and the other teams that also need to get their quarterbacks extended during or at some point during training camp. So we're going to go over that plus some more topics on today's show. Before I get started on Dallas, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, to please use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. By using that link, your question or comment will pop up in my chat box. I can read it out loud and that way get your guys' thoughts on anything I say during today's show. It's also a massive help for the show and the network, so if you guys please would use that tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. We greatly appreciate it every time you guys are able to do that with anything you have to say on today's show. But now we can start right away with arguably one of the biggest news and something I've been waiting for, honestly, to finally be acknowledged or just announced in regards to the Dallas Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb, because Lamb and the Cowboys obviously have to try and figure out something for 2024, because this is the fifth-year deal, or the fifth-year option year for CeeDee Lamb in his rookie contract. And so far through the entire offseason, CeeDee has kept pretty quiet about it. There hasn't been any real developments. Nobody's saying that it's close or that it's expected to get done at this point. Really, it's all been kept quiet. There's been no developments up until this point, and really the same thing from Dallas' standpoint on how they're feeling about it. Everything has really been about Dak Prescott up until now, where the negotiations are with him, how close are they. But it has not been, CeeDee Lamb has not been at the Dallas Cowboys facilities all throughout OTAs and really the entire offseason as well, keeping up this holdout mentality. He's not expected to show up when the Dallas Cowboys begin their official training camp practices this week. I want to say on Wednesday. CeeDee Lamb is not expected to be there to continue his holdout through however long it takes for him to get an extension. But now comes something that I think is a big deal when it comes to talking about Dak versus CeeDee Lamb. According to Calvin Watkins of the Dallas Morning News, because of the pressure from that holdout from CeeDee Lamb, the Cowboys are now prioritizing CeeDee Lamb's contract over that of Dak Prescott's, because you can only imagine, right, when you have all these star players. Mike doesn't really count now because they're not trying to figure out anything for him, but when you have Dak and CeeDee, who are both lined up to make top-of-the-market money, when you have one guy holding out and just applying more pressure, I heard somebody say that you got to be the squeaky wheel sometimes on a moving vehicle to get the team to acknowledge you and get the team to get some attention onto you to acknowledge the issue you're trying to resolve. And I think that's exactly obviously what CeeDee Lamb is doing as of right now with that pressure he's applying to the Cowboys. Now it makes sense. Really, it should have been CeeDee, I think, from the beginning, because you have one guy holding out, not being there. Not the ideal situation you want heading into a big year in 2024. Whereas with Dak Prescott, in comparison to him, he's been the good student, the loyal player, the franchise face of the Dallas Cowboys sort of player. He has been there when he doesn't have to be. He's been pretty much at everything so far, talking about his negotiations, not saying too much, giving the politically correct answer, really doing no wrong. And that holds some value as well when you're not really making a scene. I'm sure the Cowboys appreciate that, and that's probably why they were, other than the fact that Dak's a quarterback, trying to get it done with Dak, because I'm sure they appreciated that. And obviously they'd want to keep him because he just had a great year. All of that wrapped into one. You can see why it was a decent strategy to go by. But Dak could have really easily held out as well, but he's already gone through this, and I'm sure he felt confident that he could get another extension done because he's put himself in the best spot to do so. But I just believe that I said it before that if Dak Prescott wasn't a quarterback, and just based on the recent run of history with his career of the Dallas Cowboys, I think if he wasn't a quarterback and you'd compare him to CeeDee on who do you want to get done first, I think the clear answer would be CeeDee, and I think now is about time that the Dallas Cowboys sort of acknowledge that fact and try to get CeeDee Lamb's contract done, just because by the logistics of everything, comparing both markets, it would obviously be cheaper, and I think CeeDee's earned it for a plethora of reasons, similar to Dak, but CeeDee is in a point in his career now where I think you're more secure and there's more safety in extending CeeDee Lamb going forward because he's only 25 years old. His window of being great and potentially being even better is a lot longer than Dak's. I think I mentioned it previously last week that the biggest fear with Dak and giving him a lot of money, 55, maybe more than that, is that his window of being at the level that he showed last year, that level could be a lot shorter, obviously, than CeeDee's because Dak is around 30, 31 years old. The biggest fear is that it comes a lot sooner than you anticipated, and now you have all this money invested in Dak, and CeeDee, you're really struggling to pay him, and then it turns out to just blow up in your face when you've decided or when you've realized that you made the wrong decision. So to me, CeeDee's always been the safer option to me, at least to get him done first. CeeDee Lamb follows Ezekiel Elliott and Zach Martin in previous years, both players who also held out of training camp before they too were extended eventually during training camp. So this has been sort of a usual run of things for the Cowboys, especially with some of their most important players. That's why also you could be a little surprised that Dak didn't try to hold out because of the recent success that players have had with holding out. But, Dak has already gotten that extension like I mentioned before. So different ways of approaching it, but now it looks like the Cowboys are trying to prioritize CeeDee Lamb a little bit more, especially because this past weekend I saw a report by the Athletic's Diana Rossini that she reported, in contrast to some of these reports by Calvin Watkins, that Dallas and Dak and his camp so far have been having positive conversations about getting a contract extension done for Dak Prescott, even going as far as saying that he could make about $60 million per year being extended with the Dallas Cowboys. So contrasting reports there, but I find that one hard to believe because my biggest thing with Dak and the Cowboys is I just think this has just run its course. Nobody would want to admit it. Nobody wants to, because when you say something's run its course and you haven't reached the pinnacle of what you wanted to accomplish with Dak and this exceptional team that you've had, people immediately think it's a failure, and I wouldn't necessarily call it that. Of course, everyone's going to run to that because it's the Cowboys. They haven't succeeded in 25 or something years or something like that. But, I think it takes a maturity to acknowledge the fact that, hey, this just isn't working out. Let's stop doing the exact same thing we're doing each and every year and thinking something's going to change. Clearly it's not, and now you're at a point where you could smoothly transition away from that. It's going to be hard ripping that Band-Aid off and moving on from Dak Prescott, but that's where I think the first step in doing so is prioritizing CeeDee Lamb, because that way most people get the idea that, all right, they're going to prioritize CeeDee, and then if they have the available space by also planning out how to improve the rest of the team also, then they could try and work something out with Dak Prescott. And if not, you're just going to have to acknowledge it, that you're just going to have to move on, and it's just not going to work because, much like the 49ers, you can't have all these good players getting paid top of the market money. And if you are fortunate enough to have a situation where you're close to that, you have to get results, and the Cowboys just haven't done that in the amount of time I just suggested. So right now, based on that, I think it could come to a point where I think this is the right decision for the Cowboys. And just to get all sides of this argument into consideration, if you do decide to go with CeeDee, you do run the risk of a Tua or Jordan Love getting more money, and that plays into everything, right? Because you get the hint initially that maybe the Cowboys are thinking of a life past Dak Prescott by prioritizing CeeDee Lamb, and then you culminate that with Tua and Jordan Love, maybe one of them getting another contract extension before Dak Prescott, and then that really makes it tough for the Cowboys to, I believe, extend Dak, because then that price raises a little more. And I don't think, one, the Cowboys can afford that top of the market price right now. And if it grows even larger, then I really don't think they should do it, because that's too much just going to too many players. Because CeeDee, is going to want close to Justin Jefferson money, and it's just not going to work when you have Micah Parsons down the line as well. Or you could go the absolute radical route, which just popped into my head just now. You could, if there's any way of doing so, make both of them close to the highest paid in both markets. But then that way, you're really putting a lot of pressure on this year and just maybe a year or two going forward, because that's a lot of money being invested in just two positions. And not to mention that you have Michael Parsons coming up later in the future. If somehow you could fit him into the whole equation, then you have a ton, almost all of your cap space, I could imagine, going to three players, and you're not going to win anything close to what you have been accomplishing if you have just three really good players, probably, arguably, I'll say the best at each of their positions. But you need that team, you need the balance of the offensive line. They certainly need depth at the wide receiver position outside of CeeDee Lamb. The running back position is questionable. The defensive side of the ball, their defensive line is a little suspect, or linebackers as well. So this team, outside of their big three, which of course you'd want to keep them, they need to look elsewhere as well to try and improve this team, because they might have the same group of great players, but the rest of the team has subsequently gotten worse, and I don't think they're in a better position this year than they were last year, and that could also create some more disappointing results going forward. If you do extend them, the results could just also not be there because the rest of the team's just not up to par. So that's why I think prioritizing CeeDee, waiting on Dak a little bit, holding off, seeing where else you can improve. Then if it works out, it works out. If not, I think it's time for the Cowboys to finally acknowledge that they just have to move on. Again, it's not going to be hard. They're probably going to get killed over it, but those are the tough decisions that I think they've been trying to avoid, and I think now it's time where they're gonna have to just accept it up until this point. But with training camp, I expect that all to sort of accelerate now, because everything's getting more intense. You have to apply these game plans and strategies with the players that you want to be there long term. So expect some more developments going forward in the next couple of weeks. But as we wait for those things to develop, we're going to move on with the rest of the show. We're going to get to the last group of positions that ESPN ranked on their website, the defensive backs, going from 1 to 10. My reactions to it, and my reactions to some of the reasons that these corners were ranked where they were. Some pretty harsh comments and some pretty interesting perspectives on where these guys ranked. That is coming up right after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.